Ready? Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Our state archivist is keeping an eye on us virtually this evening. Morgan Stentz from our state please be certain to sign in. If you didn't sign in, please leave. Take a moment and silence your cell phone. Rest viewers for this program forever. Mics and video will be turned off during the presentation, and during Q&A you may ask your question in the chat. It will be relayed to our presenter. All of our programs are recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel for later viewing. With the Wyoming State Historic Preservation Office, he received his Master of Arts in Anthropology from the University of Idaho. He has a particular interest and has taken on a variety of 19th century American trail and battle sites. Military campaigns in the American West were arduous and grueling. From the desert plain tonight's program will discuss the soldiers' experiences on the campaigns and the distances they marched and how that characterized their campaigns in the American West. So I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, and he does have music.
I do. So story behind this, real quick, Lionel. Garage sale. I partied with my 75 cents. It's interesting. Get a load of this. No one likes it. Keep my own family. Keep my wife endures it. And before that, I'd just like to say thank you all for coming. Archaeologists and have me on some of their digs and some of the ones I say thanks to my wife. It is her birthday today. Let me do this so if we can all just say happy birthday, DJ. Love you, and then we'll get started here. So yeah, the American Indian Wars. Fights, battles from California to New York and everywhere in between. In our intro that Robin gave, campaigns in the American West were arduous, grueling, and they went from the desert plains to rocky peaks. And while cars have made these distances at times seem trivial, crossing these distances in a short time in order to meet an enemy in battle. The distances covered, the equipment carried, and the hardships endured are a testament to the endurance of the enlisted man, but also highlight the tactics and strategies developed out of the necessity of having such a small force manage such a large swath of country. The predicament the regular army was typically put in during these campaigns was adeptly summarized by Major Edwin C. Mason during the Bannock War of 1878, who stated, "If we had an army, we could very soon dispose of any force in this nation, but we have not got and sticks of men instead of companies and regiments. 2 summers running of Indian wars is not much of a good thing for me." Before discussing some of these campaigns that we'll focus on, and I'll focus on 3, and I chose 3 that I worked on and 3 that were back to back to back for several units. So to show you the total mileage. a lot of things, I think, especially in the West. We have to start with the Civil War. As one of my favorite historians said, James McPherson said, the Civil War is the central event in the American experience. The revolution left unresolved by the American Revolution and whether the United States was to be a dissolvable confederation of sovereign states or an indivisible nation with a sovereign national government. Next slide, please. And whatever really informed the Frontier Army. And one of those is something that was attributed to Stonewall Jackson, foot cavalry. The idol of the army and the people is soldiers foot cavalry. What was pioneered was that in the enemy. As Stonewall Jackson himself said, always mystify, mislead, surprise the enemy, if possible. And when you strike and overcome him, never let up in pursuit. So and also another concept that I think really informs how the Indian Wars were. And he's a hostile people, and must make old and young, rich and poor, feel the hard hand of war, as well as their organized armies. I know that this recent movement of mine through Georgia has a wonderful effect in this respect. Thousands who had been deceived by their lying papers and the belief that they were being whipped, that we were being whipped all the time, that his men would live off the land, that he would stretch his supply trains, but he would not be relying on them. Next slide, please. And we can't talk about the Frontier Army without talking about the Civil War and military surplus. There's one thing our government can tend to be is cheap. And in particular, after the Civil War, they were cheap. The equipment was reused and used, even rancid food. This is a canteen that was found at soldier from soldiers about the herbs, rotten hardtack, that they used the weevils and beetles were just protein. They received spoiled canned goods that they would throw out. They received it was what they got fresh. They loved it, and they consumed it at least in pints at least 3 times. About like 12 ounces. So next slide, please. And also with the Civil War is a big thing is movement and communication. Movement into the interior of the continent did not cease with the Civil War. It actually accelerated, in particular with the end of the Civil War. We have a bunch of people moving into the deserters from the Confederate Army, refugees are going north. And this leads to many open conflicts with Native Americans as they're getting pushed and people are pushing into their land, their hunting grounds, and it's just leading to many conflicts. Transcontinental Railroad has a lot to do with this as the nation's tied together. Mass settlement and movement in the interior really branches prosperity, but also limited opportunities. A lot of the soldiers in the Army wrote that they joined because they didn't have job opportunities. $13 a month was pretty good. A lot of them also said they joined out to learn English or assimilate better. A lot of them, this was my favorite, how many admitted that they to strike it rich. And then quickly decided, oh, I don't want to be underground in a mine. And then came back to the Army. When they've enlisted, they're confronted with isolation and boredom. And Initially, there is a lot of monotony in their day. They drink a lot, they gamble a lot. And in consequence, there's a lot of crime and punishment going on. For Boise in Idaho, the Veterans Administration kind of covers that campus now. There's one story about a guy on Christmas Eve wasn't allowed to participate in the officer's ball. And poor guy broke into the liquor stores, got drunk, somehow got on. For that, everyone said that his ghost haunts the post. And that did. Next slide, please. But it is a tale of two posts. If you're in officer class, if you're in the cavalry, you get to play polo. It's quite fun. Your pay affords you a certain amount of luxury, even in these Western posts, to live a life of luxury, to have picnics, and you get to have your family on the post. But it's not all fun and games. There's a lot of drill. There's a lot of practice. There's a lot of instruction. And at the time, from the 1860s through 70s, and I think this begins to change after the little Battle of Little Bighorn. To target practice. But they drilled. So when they were getting ready to go in the field, this was regulation, what they were told to carry. Of course, they carried some other stuff or had the wagons carry some stuff. They were part of wagon train. Infantry, the regulation burden was 50 pounds. They'd have their knapsack or bedroll that they'd have all this stuff in. They might have a half dog tent, but too much weight, so they just throw them out. That's kind of fun because they never had extra shoes that I can tell, and several days rations. So they have their rancid bacon, their beans, hardtack, coffee, and up to 150 rounds of 45 caliber when they switch to that, and a canteen with water. A lot of mints, not some whiskey in it from what I'm reading. But cavalry was much the same. Have to carry some grain for the horse. One of my favorite things that they take on campaign, government sanction usefulness, but it was the 12-pound mountain howitzer. This cannon featured throughout the Indian Wars. I want to get my facts wrong. Pound used 1/2 pound powder charge, fired a round shot, shell, case, or can. And carry on mules back into any campaign. Oh, and it got the nickname Shack Ass Battery because of the German immigrants who couldn't really pronounce their J's at the time, I guess. Front of, if you're ever in Dayton, Washington, it's in front of their courthouse. I had to stop and take a picture. I was driving through there after field work, and I, of course, circled the block a couple times. It's like, is that what I thought it was? This is my favorite photo I've ever found of it. This is in Harney, Oregon. They're straddling that. Has nothing to do with a whole lot, but I like it. Before we go into some of the campaigns, I just wanted to say there were many patrols, field exercises, or units on campaign where nothing happened. This caused many men to desert, which we can talk about later. But they were on either exploration missions, they were mapping parts of the territory, for exercise, for drills, some patrol. Then for being so rowdy, they were also building roads and river crossings. I found a couple instances where one captain took his unit out as discipline because he up and back. And sometimes something happens, sometimes not. And one thing that always interests me on these is because a lot of men were given pretty good distance. They also had rodometers mounted on the wagon wheels that gave them a pretty accurate reading. They knew certain distances from previously mapped or and one captain admitted it's an educated guess that he was disputing with his pride. Types of regulation campaign that officers were instructed to do. The last one's one of my favorites, and I'll tell you why. But marching is their standard form of travel. And the regulation manual said a good commander will so conduct his men in fighting order at any moment. Like I would not know what's likely to be required. There's force march, which we'll talk about that a lot in some of these campaigns, both offensive and defensive. And to have all things necessary for the comfort and safety of the command. And countermarch is a marching back, specifically a marching by which a unit of troops reverses directions. So retreat. No, I guess the when I first read that, I was like, you mean go back? Okay, I know. Okay, yeah. Next line, please. All right, our mission. All right, so we're about to go on campaign. So let's listen to one of their favorite campaigns. Typically, what they would sing leaving the fort is "The Girl I Left Behind Me," but this is regular Armeo. Thought you guys should ever break from me growing it on, so I take notes. If it works, then I just look like a chump.
Ago this very day we went to Governor's Isle, where Stanford and Cannon in true military style. $17 American every month we surely will get. New York to jail, or it's up the Hudson River where the coppers take sail. So we puckered up our courage with bravery to go. We cursed the day we ran away to the regular RBO. And drops the roll upon my soul, that is the way we go. 40 miles a day on beans a day in the regular RBO. We were sent to Arizona for to fight. We lay among the ditches in the dirty yellow mud, and we never saw one day and turned the forest blood. We was captured by the Indians and took for this the chief, and he sent with ham and Irish to the dirty Indian faith. But on the telegraph, there was Sergeant John McCafferty and Captain Donahue, and he was marching to the market, I'm coming to you. The drums would roll upon my soul, that is the way we go. 40 miles a day on beans a day in the regular RBO. I got my bills on those. England as far as who's who's. But the USA never changes, they say, but particularly wears the blue. And when you go out on parade, you have your musket right, or it's off you go to the guardhouse to while away at night. And when you want a furlough, to the colonel you ought to go. He says, go to bed in Windsor, you did in the regular RBO. The roll my soul, that is the way we go. 30 miles a day. But 'twas out upon the Yellowstone we had the damnedest time. If we made the trip with Rosebud George 6 months without a dime. So 1,800 miles we went through hunger, snow, and rain. With backs so bare and gracious, where no trips to grass or grain. Well, the donkey starving by your side, no rations for the room. Sure, eat your boots and saddles, your booty, the packers and the mule. But when we came to fight him, your soldier blood was slow, and it was. There was Sergeant John McCafferty and Captain Donohoe. They made this march and told with Margaret Gill and Company Kill. The drops would roll upon my soul. That is the way we.
I'm not a good. Move her. The Indian Wars, a lot of men when they wrote about it, maybe later in life or when they were writing their daily journals, that we fortunately have some of them, talked about these wars as who could last the longest. It was a campaign. How long could you stay in the field and try your? They were sent out against Native Americans. Campaigning was arduous, hazardous, exhausting. Many men said it was also boring, punctuated by sheer moments of terror and excitement, and it was time consuming. Their columns would wind their way, and they'd hope, and a lot of the strategy was hope you crash into who you are looking for. The Nez Perce War, which is an armed conflict between the United States and several bands of the Nez Perce tribe, who are called non-treaty Indians. Sheridan, I think, summed the conflict up best when he said, "We took away their country, their means of support, broke." They made war. Would any of you expect less? So the war ends, campaign map. I apologize, the scan didn't come out all that well. So here's the bend in the Columbia River. Here's where they really begin. And some of these units who are stationed out here in Fort Wayne get to march from the Columbia River through Idaho all the way up to the Missouri River. Funny story, when they get to Omaha, the federal government said, "We don't have money for you to take a train ride, walk back." Thankfully, General Howard was able to men took part in. It was exhausting for them, and they lost many men. But the distances they marched took a greater toll on them. Nails and a sorry appearance with no shoes. There was one captain. Sorry. Along the way, most companies in their department lost half or 3/4 of their men just through marching without shoes alone. Next slide. Perry noted that there was a wonderful instance of dogged perseverance. Marched 56 miles, averaging 3 miles. A forced march that is almost unparalleled. Get ready for the next year's campaign. The surge. Greatest sufferings arose from only 2 men deserted during. Those were fellows. The cost of the Nez Perce War was roughly, in today's dollars, $31 million. A lot of lives lost. or 45 people, 36 of whom were children. And as I mentioned before, many units were decimated by this march. They had to get their men back up to fighting shape for the next year. And that takes us to the Bannock War of 1878, which is a short-lived but consequential campaign for the Native Americans of Idaho and the Columbia Plateau. Again, as of treaty rights signed on for. These factors led them to leave their respective reservations because they were starving, in an open challenge to U.S. policies and the actions of its citizens. It's a campaign of chase. Okay, go back. This is an interesting one. It's another campaign of chase, kind of like the year before. By this hand-drawn map that Jocelyn Perry gave his son, he starts going circles as they're marching through Eastern Oregon. It begins at the Big Camish Prairie in Idaho, and as the army's dispatched out, it quickly in the Department of War records, because I like that they chose where they were going, and the color coordinated when they went across the same route or different routes. Gives you a really good picture of seeing how much they recovered spots, where their battles end up being, and we'll talk about a couple of them. But there's many minor and various actions of this campaign, with the final one being action being recorded in Wyoming. Go back. Which makes me wonder, how far did show bands march? Where are they going? How much ground did they cover? It's just I don't have records for that. This one's interesting. Miles fight is interesting because, as I mentioned before, Jocelyn Perry was very impressed with the 4th Artillery Air Force march. After the Battle of Birch Creek, General Howard in his column, he goes to Walla Walla. So Jocelyn and a few others in the 24th or 21st infantry, companies B, D, E, G, H, I, and K of the first. He doesn't know where they are at the time. Last he heard, they were about 80 miles south of the Umatilla Indian Agency near Pendleton, Oregon. Well, by the time a messenger gets to them, they're about 6. And then they get a message from the Indian agent who says, Shoshone Bannocks are Miles and his men make a forced march so they get there by daybreak, and the men begin to make camp at the Indian Agency. They get told that they throw up their pickets to watch, and they get told, all right, this is going to be your first hot meal in 3 days. Up guards and because even in Miles' official report, he said, my men were a bit angry at having missed their first pot of hot coffee in days. And as one soldier put it, they formed their skirmish line, the Shoshone Bannocks. And as one soldier very funnily put it, he said, "It was the best 4th of July celebration I had ever seen. Minus the fact that I was..." The day was spent with intermittent long-range fire between these two groups until at 2 p.m. his command exhausted. The Oregon Trail used to pop up around here. But up that hill into the mountains, his men were shoeless. Was dislodged from their positions. This became the engagement, and his men ended up staying there for 4 days because they were waiting for. They finally got their to fight shoeless, which I thought was a very common thing in the Civil War. I didn't know that that carried on. But one thing that was not common for some of these men was the use of gunboats on the Columbia River. And this is kind of an interesting facet. It ties into something that on a survey we found archaeologically. So you guys are going to have to hold on with me. It's a long story, but the archival work on this side is really worth it, I promise. Who was department, and he said, "You shall equip 2 steamers your service. If you do not have men, hire them. If they do not." It must have marksmen enough to be effective. Now the Gatling gun, next slide. This is the steamer that he took up the river. I just forgot. I don't think I said that. Now the Gatling gun during the American Indian Wars was used. It's not used in most cases as a machine gun like we would think about it today. It was used for and a couple times in Oklahoma and Texas. I think some of the records are really hard. The Ordnance Department records are pretty incomplete and missing. I don't know if any. Not to speak ill of the Department of the Columbia Ordnance Department, but I think what they put on the front of the boat was something like this. This might have been common. Of course, the Mountain Howitzer was the one they put on. They equipped it with this. It's bales that they had it, but they had a lot of wool bales that they used as on the steamer. Kress and his command are patrolling the Columbia River. Now, one thing that Captain Kress didn't was a lot of tribes, even at this time in the 1870s, still lived on the Columbia River. One being to do with the war. So Kress is coming, streaming in the Columbia River up and then our Umatillas heard that the Bannocks, Shoshone Bannocks, well, Kress started coming up, and a very funny story. Here, so you'll have Gray, who was the steamboat captain, thought it was interesting. As he's steaming close, Captain Gray said, as they were steaming close to the northern part of the island, he didn't notice that everyone on the boat hit the deck. I mean, he kept steaming. jumping, to which an irate, they're shooting at us. Now, the other side of it is a tribal member who gave an oral history in 1917 recalled that their camp came under fire with what seemed to be a white light emanating from the boat straight at them. And he said it must have been a machine gun. It's very interesting. But regardless of who shot first, the Gatling gun laid down cover fire, and Kress and his command deployed to the island with the order, go ashore and many of the horses were seen floating down the Columbia all the way to Portland after this battle. And one thing that amazed the captain was how many of his bullets had pierced his pillow in the gang house, in the gangway pilot house, sorry. And he said the fire was the attack on Long Island ended in a handful of hours, and many of the tribal members fled north as Kress's command gathered and destroyed all canoes, teepees, material goods, and 200 horses. I said, Major Kress has displayed imbecility, and we assume some champions will be found to ask for his promotion, and we assume some champion. I am going insane. On the ground of this daring fight with Indian ponies, the brave captain with his whiskers who successfully vanquished the band. The paper goes on to say what extraordinary idiot Kress was not to recognize friend from foe. And today, this is what Long Island looks like. It's being eroded by the Columbia River dams. Research and what really spurred me learning about the Battle of Long Island was sometimes we find stuff archaeological happened to be a wagon axle driven in the ground right about here in central Washington. So after the Battle of Long Island, well, there's a newlywed couple on this side of the Columbia River. This is the modern Hanford Nuclear Reservation up here. The Perkins caught wind that there was trouble. Cut out their journey, same day that Long Island was attacked. Well, unfortunately, they came across the survivors of the attack. And these survivors down there, we've lost 2 people as well. We've lost our horses, and they said we should kill these people in retaliation. And oral histories for some of the tribes that they did in 1917 said, no, these people had said, and everyone said they went anyways. When the Perkins did not turn up in Yakima, family and friends went out looking for them. And they found their bodies, fortunately at this point, and they ended up taking them back to Yakima for burial later. One of the men, John Edwards, I believe is right here, who was part of the search party, said, I'd like to put a marker. He found that pork company. He piles rocks on it, and that's where it's been. Next slide, please. And this is what we found. Here's the wagon axle that he had driven in, which is poignant moments, I think, or archaeological things I found is it would be very ephemeral. I don't know if I'd ever found a location like this where the bodies have been moved, there's nothing there, and it just, remember when we found it, we kind of stopped and we thought for a bit, because what a world. They stumped the chump though when we were out there. Last action occurred in Wyoming. How many miles away from the start? 1,000. Rodas and Howard was in command. Department. They had a rivalry. He took credit for the victory in the Nez Perce War, and if you read Howard's letters, he wasn't too happy about that. Nelson Miles claimed victory in this campaign too, which Howard was very. The total expenditure in today's money is about $17 million. Estimated casualties, killed or wounded soldiers is 32. Citizens acting with troops is 1. Citizens not with troops, 33. Native Americans was recorded at 74. But Oliver Alders Howard makes a point in his annual report to say that this does not account for actually be higher. We do not know. I do not have an accurate count. Next slide. Before they get kind of transferred out or shaken out. Is the sheep eater campaign. And I have to admit about this one, and I was telling Robin this story, is when I was getting my master's, I had a professor. Found bottles, found all that. You need to learn. I never will learn anything about this. I will never need to learn anything about this. As I told Robin, I did apologize to him last time I saw him. Because now I told him, I was like, hey, I know something about this. Central Idaho in the Salmon River area. This is operations occurred from June to October 1879. There's a few battles and skirmishes of this. One was Catley's Affair, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The Umatilla Scout Skirmish and attack on the pack train where the only recorded Army casualty happened there, and then they surrendered. This was another campaign. Last campaign, the average marching was 2,200 miles. This campaign was 1,100 miles in the mountains, which was cross mountain snowdrifts, and they had to. One thing that I found really interesting was that the Army at this time decided that they should recruit a company of what they call Indian. List duration 6 months. They were attached to the 21st Infantry Indian Company. Lieutenant Edward S. Farrow was their commander. Is what one of the captain or lieutenants noted who was with Farrow. And he said on the day that the company of scouts with great circumstance, a farewell address was made. Goodbyes were said and hands were shaken by all, including the scouts and their families, and the young children with officers. Then they saddled up. The families formed a line. And as scouts with the seriousness of what they were departing to, counting on it would be, or if they would see their families again. The officer went on to say this touched them because they had read these people wrong. They had viewed them as stoic, unfeeling, and unflinching. And this always just stuck with me. When the reality of it being not too dissimilar to our own fears or heart. This was just a grueling campaign that they went on. They were marching through 20 feet high snow. The campaign. They were trying to cross swollen rivers, up mountains. They lost 45 pack animals in this. Most of their gear and ammunition, they said, went with it. It was not uncommon for men throughout their marches to go 72 hours or more without food. Next. Call it a mountain charade. He was not amused by his time. Campaign. As this photo shows, this was a cabin of a man who was killed and burned. And we do find in a couple of battlefields musket balls. So it was a hot war. Even if he didn't have, he was a little salty. He boasted that he had 101 fights in his life and he won them all. Really, they approached the town of Oro Grande, Idaho, which had been burned allegedly by the sheep eaters, and it appeared to have been abandoned for some time. The men would not eat for a couple of days, moved through the charred remains of the town. When a call went out to form a skirmish, quite scared, having done 2 summers of campaign, until they realized that they formed a skirmish line and were told to charge on a field of onions. And he said, was proud of his command's success in the attack against the a Chinese miner approached Bernard the next day and said, "You ate all my onions." The claim was settled for $25, which Bernard said was a good investment to keep his men from getting screwed. Another interesting fact about this campaign is Bernard, while it was initially begun by the murder of several Chinese miners, and that was attributed to the sheep eaters, Bernard felt that the white settlers were at fault, mostly because they were robbing his pack train all the time. And for 3 summers, Bernard had been in the field, and he said it was a tremendous drag. Many more hungry miles awaited his command on their march back to Fort Boise. And he was thankful for a transfer to the American Southwest. The campaign ended with Pharaoh's command negotiating a surrender, and they marched down the top of the river. For 3, there might be in other departments focused on the Department of the Columbia. These are the units that marched in every campaign. During the Nez Perce War, the grand total for them was 7,000 miles with their trip down the Missouri River and their bummed railroad ride. During the Bannock War, it was 2,253 miles. Summer after was 1,168 miles. And I did find a winner in all of it. For these last 2 campaigns, topped out at 5,000 miles. Give or take some change there. So throughout the wounds, arrow wounds, gunshot wounds, infections, skull fractures, believe it or not, according to the Army medical report, not from blunt force trauma from battle, but from recoil of their weapons, if they were not holding it right in combat. Yeah, Same with traumatic peritonitis, pelvic fracture, broken collarbone, contusions of the back, pelvis, and kidney, concussion and compression in the brain, and dislocation of the wrist and shoulder. Which still at this time, I've read a couple with the dislocation of the wrist, they would amputate. Country matters, we've come a long way. That's all I'm gonna say. Next slide, please. But for non-combat related issues that these men faced, the list is a little bit bigger. There were more than wrong. And that's just how you did, I guess, amputation was really common. People complained and were treated for back pain. I don't want to know how they were treated for back pain. They just said they treated it. So there's some historical mysteries I'm going to leave for the imagination. Blown out knees, chronic coughs, headaches, joint pain, including arthritis, rheumatism, torn or lost cartilage of the knees and hips, nerve damage, bruises, cuts, scrapes, muscle soreness, bone degeneration and bone spurs, leaking sap fluids, liquids, dehydrations, diarrhea, malaria, pneumonia, sunstroke, malnutrition, common cold, influenza, typhoid, cholera, hypothermia, infection from blisters and cuts. This was an interesting one. Struck by lightning. Unfortunately, there was this really gay Russell someone got struck. He slipped into a suicide was recorded on campaigns too. And a couple of the soldiers' letters do mention that men did commit suicide if they got the case of a captain who for Boise who got crushed, his head got crushed by a weapon. He died when he was leaving on one of these campaigns. That was very tragic. And poison wounds from rattlesnakes or spiders. I feel like that one's kind of cheap, but happened. Also found it interesting on these campaigns what the public perception of the U.S. Army was at the time. This is one of my Howard, Oliver Otis Howard, was an abolitionist. Howard University is named after him. He was part of Freedmen's Bureau. I think there's many layers going on, but as it says, oh, Howard, and it's because Howard had sent a telegram to DC saying, I am still beyond to the War Department, delivered by the people of Washington State, by their senator. Distance, and they were lazy, and they did purposeless marches. And they said, we want peace and justice, and not war. Through shows of strength, and Howard is a perfectly good old show of strength. Another thing I found interesting, one of the reporters related this, and Howard related this in his own autobiography, is at the Battle of Birch Creek, the reporter accused him of being a coward because he turned white when the bullets started flying. And Howard said, and also it's interesting, the tribes name for the U.S. Army at the time is very common names. In the Northwest, they'd call them the day after tomorrow because they'd leave their post one day and you might see them the day after tomorrow, but you never had to worry about them. Walks the Heap was a big one. And one of the interesting ones I saw was Boston's Pike. So, one of the scouts was interviewed by one of those newspapers up in Oregon, I believe it was. And they fretted over leaving men like they had to in the field. And when asked about what his greatest regret was in his Indian wars. He'd been through many of them. He said his regret was that our scouting outfit never had the tools or time to dig graves for dead Indians and had to cover them. He spent the rest of his life, along with others, they were buying and paying for tombstones for their fallen and throughout the field. This one's in central Idaho for Private Hoffner, who died in that sheep eater campaign when a bullet went through both. Died right then, and they said that at the time he leaves behind a wife and daughter, they rolled his body in blankets and buried him. No shop. As if there had been pomp and ceremony. No more, old comrade, will you be called to fat bacon. And that's about all I have for you guys. If you have any questions or anything like that, please just let me know.
Too many questions.
I
Can't even think of them now.
Okay.
There's so many interesting subjects went over there. Each one. Yeah, such limited time.
Always hear that they come back and remove their dead at night. That's not true.
So it was true, and they remove them during combat too. There's a fear of mutilation or anything like that. So for like that on this, it depends on which tribe you're talking to. The army and the show bands, so they removed a lot of their, dead that were there or whatever, that got them out real quick. And was that they said, since they didn't get along, they opened their hog pens and let them, yeah. I don't know if that was true or not. That ethnographer. There's like Rube Robbins was, I think, the guy's the captain or the scout's name. That they tried their best to put rocks on in particular, because coyotes and all sorts of animals, they really set with them in a few of the letters, or it's more some of the when they sat down and like stuff they wrote, they were like, that really bugged me that we didn't give some robber burials. Mm-hmm. Some areas. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite book about the frontier armies?
I do. I have two. He interviewed a lot of veterans. He had that for kind of an updated version. I have a way to call it Rego. I recommend the best. I think they cover experiences too. Because there's some winter camp. I was wrestling with it to talk about winter campaigns, or there's the famous horse meat march that Crook did, where they breed their dead horses and whatnot. But they would march out of their shoes. So they would get to a lot of places and not have shoes. And their socks would be gone by that point too. And I just haven't surveyed a lot of that area. And even anytime I was on a hike, mountains without, shoes, their feet have to just be, I mean, some of them, when their feet were shot, I know they go on R&R for like 3 weeks to a month, just trying to get rehab. But Yeah, no, I think they would have loved if they could take the shoes off and have an extra pair.
That also happened in the Civil War.
Because a lot of them were used to moving around there.
Yeah, they wouldn't just take them off, they would just march out there.
Yeah.
Wear them out.
Yeah, wear them out. Is while there's a lot of gold coming in, surplus, and they're really nickel and diming at that point. We did the Civil War. Let's get rid of everyone.
I didn't realize the sheep herders, eaters were such a bad group. You always hear them tending their sheep by themselves on a hill.
Yeah, that campaign in central Idaho is one I'd like to be. Peddlers accusing crimes when the thought was by a lot of them, even Otis Howard kind of mentioned this, that there's a thought that they're killing the Chinese miners for their gold. That's what I think goes on there now.
Other questions?
Take away from presentation today.
A chump here. I think that for a lot of various reasons, that like the settling of the American West, I think a lot of people are looking at it right now and talking about maybe the narratives behind it, maybe the romanticized narrative that could have been put on it. And I'd like to say that what my favorite thing about this, it's something, there's a lot of human emotions there with people that I didn't ever ascribe any humanity myself. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Any other questions?
The people that left the they were killed by Indians or they moved to the wilderness.
Yeah, so the desertion.
Yeah.
From stuff. Yeah, there's some. I know if they were in the Southwest, some were a little more apprehensive to desert. West, especially like in somewhere like Idaho, Colorado too, for that matter. Some of the gold fields were real easy to get to, and so they jumped ship real quick. Or something like even when Custer was doing his Black Hills expedition, they had a lot of desertions. So people, I think, were opportunistic about it, but I don't have an exact shot.
Even in Wyoming.
In Wyoming, oh gosh. For that, like every month, the post would say garrison strength, like who deserted. But I don't know if they say you will get comments in those post return. Or what happened, or there's one post return at Fort Boise where they talked about how much debt they were going to be in from the Christmas party. And that was kind of funny to me, but so you might look at. I think Ancestry has them digitize the post returns. So you
We
could,
have someone like
you do, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So they'll have them, and I'd pick some posts like that. That would be I think that would be or anything like that at the Army at the time. I know it was high. They had trouble just keeping a full company strength. Cavalry was better because the pay was better,
Yeah.
but infantry had a little harder time. So I think it was $13 a month, and then I think the U.S. government, after desertion rates were so high that they were like, okay, $14 but bucks a month, and we're not negotiating anymore. So or $34 a month. So
We just steel,
yeah,
one ground for steel, so some of that's fresh from wrong.
yeah, Port Steel would be a good one to look at.
Monotony, heat, cold.
Yeah, and that's for posts. That's what they complain about all the time was the chores they'd have to do, and they'd march, they'd drill, they have to. The vegetable garden kept them from getting scurvy. It never been like, I need to think about not getting scurvy. It's just, that's another one of those human experiences that.
Thank you very much. Here to join us on September 10th, we have Dan Lyons, who will do a presentation on Boyd Briggs, Wyoming's first military aviator. Someone that you know would like to do a presentation, just let me know. We'll research program. They drive. Would have never thought I'd be saying that. With all the heat that we've had, but thank you for the water.
Yeah.